Today we are talking about the Sonoran Pronghorn, Antilocapra americana, sonoriensis. The current conservation status as listed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is endangered for this subspecies of animals. A little bit of background on the pronghorn. It's a small deer-like mammal with black pronged horns, hence the name, and it's primarily a browser, not a grazer, meaning that it eats forbs, not grasses. This is the fastest land animal in North America and is thought to have co-evolved as a prey species for the American cheetah, which is now extinct. It's the sole surviving member of the family Antilocapridae, within the order Artiodactyla. Antilocapra americana sonoriensis was first described by Goldman in 1945. The etymology for this is antilo meaning antelope and capra meaning goat. Funny enough, the pronghorn is neither an antelope nor a goat, as those are both in a different family. Americana refers to the American pronghorn, though it's the only pronghorn in existence, and sonoriensis is the subspecies, referring to the Sonoran Desert, which is where this subspecies calls home. The historic range is here in light brown, and it stretched from Southern California and Arizona down south into Baja California and Sonora, Mexico. The current range is scattered between southern Arizona and northern Sonora, Mexico. This is one of 5 extant subspecies of pronghorn endemic to western North America. It was listed as endangered in 1967 under the Endangered Species Preservation Act, and is listed as endangered in Mexico. The first Sonoran Pronghorn recovery plan was completed in 1982, and there are roughly 800 surviving pronghorn today, with roughly 300 of those living in the United States. Before European settlement, an estimated 35 million pronghorn inhabited North America, but by 1924, the range-wide population of all pronghorn had decreased to less than 20,000 animals. So if you do the math on that, there's 35 million pronghorn historically. You divide that by the 20,000 remaining, and that means that there's less than 0.05% of the historic population remaining. This is due in part to European settlement, so Europeans settling the West with widespread shooting of pronghorn for meat, recreation, and then also to reduce the potential competition with domestic livestock. Landscape development and the development of Sonora, Mexico, Arizona, California, and Baja California, Mexico. And this is due in part to competition with livestock for forage, fencing, introducing barriers to movement, and habitat conversion and fragmentation. Domestic livestock are also a factor that led to the decline in the pronghorn. And whenever you have livestock on a range setting and they graze too much, they can turn those open landscapes into shrublands where mesquite and other shrubs encroach on those open landscapes. This is detrimental to pronghorn as they prefer very little cover and very open home ranges. And then also severe drought, which basically leads to overgrazing due to the lack of sustained forage production. The grass isn't getting enough water to grow. By the 1920s, there were an estimated 100 Sonoran pronghorn in the United States. So let's talk about each of these factors. European settlement, basically like we mentioned earlier, hunting. Here's a picture of a person who hunted a pronghorn, and I tried to make it look like an old picture, but I also blurred out their face for privacy reasons. Landscape development, so competition with livestock such as sheep, goats, cattle, and then also bison. Typically, some of these species aren't direct competitors, but whenever you get to a drought, then a lot of the animals are going to be less picky, and so they might start consuming those forb species. In regards to fencing, pronghorn are nomadic animals moving wherever the forage and food is plentiful. However, fencing inhibits their travel as they have a hard time crossing under the fences because usually that lowest wire on the barbed wire is too low, and they don't prefer to jump over the fences. So one promising solution is the pronghorn-friendly fencing that you see here in this Landowner's Guide to Pronghorn-Friendly Fencing produced by the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. Domestic livestock, like I said, can change a shift in the vegetation structure from open landscapes to those with shrubs such as mesquite. So here we see a picture from 1922 where it's fairly open range. Then by 1962, you see that there's a whole bunch of cacti species, there's some forbs, there's some bigger shrub species, and then if you look at 2003, the grass has largely receded and it's mainly shrub species. Severe drought, as mentioned earlier, you can see that here in the reds and oranges and yellows, that these are all years with high drought, and then the blues are years and months with more rain than there is drought. Still, nonetheless, you can see that there's quite a few spots where there's frequent severe drought. So, what's the recovery goal for this species? This is, by the way, this is outlined by the Sonoran Pronghorn Recovery Plan, which is an official United States Fish and Wildlife Service document. The recovery goal is obviously to delist the species. The Sonoran Pronghorn Recovery Plan has 4 overriding objectives, which we'll talk about. Number 1 is to incorporate the biodiversity principles of representation, resiliency, and redundancy. So representation refers to a reduction in mortality. So vaccinating for diseases, implementing predator control, and decreasing the amount of poaching, just to name a few examples of measures being taken to reduce mortality. Then increasing resiliency, so evaluating and maintaining captive breeding efforts, basically just figuring out what works and then doing that. And then also increasing redundancy or establishing additional populations. So evaluating the suitability and legality of reintroduction, evaluate reintroduction techniques, and then also release pronghorn onto maintained management units. Another objective is to summarize what is known about Sonoran pronghorns. So you can do that by conducting research, so monitoring the habitat and the populations, creating maps, articles, publications, and then also assessing the impacts of land use. Basically, you can't do anything if you don't even know what you're trying to do. And then also protecting existing range, so acquiring more land, restoring degraded habitat, and then cooperating with local, state, national, and international partners. The Sonoran Pronghorn Recovery Plan has another objective, which is to identify threats to the species. So here we can see a Border Patrol vehicle and then also an open pit mine, basically just trying to reduce these activities and their impacts. Also off-road vehicles, people hiking through the desert, those types of things. And then, as we've mentioned earlier, just describing the actions necessary to conserve the Sonoran pronghorn, which we've mentioned on all of the previous slides. So the upshot to all of this is that since this plan has been implemented and these practices have been put into place and followed, we can see here that since the 1990s, pronghorn species, or the Sonoran pronghorn, has been increasing in population size, with 2013 demonstrating that there were over 816 individuals documented in Mexico and the United States. Here's the literature review. Thank you very much.